Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epic Times that gives you insights beyond the headlines. Now, as always, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps get our show out to more people. But look, a new type of bomb is being showcased by the Chinese Communist Party. And this one, well, it aims to destroy an electric grid, a bomb specifically made for it, in fact. A propaganda video for this bomb was released on Douyin by a social media channel run by CCTV. That's China's state television network, one of the main CCP mouthpieces, like their official thing. And what it shows is a simulation where a bomb is fired from a ground-based launcher, breaks into cluster munitions, and then destroys an electric station. And this is concerning because it suggests the Chinese Communist Party would target the electric grid in the event of a conflict. And they're promoting it, they're showing it off, they're sending a message. Now, the CCP has never tried hiding its intent to target the U.S. electric grid if we went to war with them, if a big conflict broke out. In fact, this is even written up in their official military doctrine. It's part of what they call the Assassin's Mace program. And it basically focuses on the, so-called soft points of the U.S. military. And this is the thinking. They think they might not be able to stand up against the full force of the U.S. military. They cannot go head-to-head with our military. So instead, what the CCP is planning to do is wipe out the enabling technologies of our military and our society as a whole. And that ties into critical infrastructure, the things you need to make a society run. Electricity, roads, so on, right? In the event of a war, they would put a key focus on taking down the electric grid. This is written in their Assassin's Mace doctrine, and they also would target U.S. satellites and other things used for, navigation, weapons targeting, communications, the enabling factors of our military. Now, here's a bit more on this particular weapon system. The Mirror said this: China has unveiled a new mysterious blackout bomb in what could be seen as a huge threat to Taiwan, the U.S., and other rival nations. It says the fearsome device can knock out enemy power stations, causing a complete loss of electricity in a targeted area of around 10,000 square miles. In other words, you wouldn't need to launch that many of them to wipe out basically the entire grid. Now, they note this. They said it was recently outlined in an animated video shared by state broadcaster China Central Television, CCTV. It says the graphite bomb can be launched from a land-based vehicle, ejecting more than 90 cylinder-shaped submunitions. It's like, again, basically cluster munitions that bounce before impact and detonate midair, releasing carbon filaments to short-circuit electrical grids. In other words, within the munitions are elements designed in particularly just for that. It says it has a range reportedly of 290 kilometers and a 490-kilogram warhead. The bomb can be used to target military substations and other important infrastructure. It notes CCTV, however, failed to reveal any further details on the weapon and its status, instead referring to it as a type of mysterious type of domestically made missile, made in China, right? Now, I should note, this is technically not new. The CCP is showcasing it as a brand new weapon. Other countries do have munitions that use these type of filament type bombs. They have actually been used twice that I can think of in military history. And in those incidents, yes, they were used in particularly for that, to wipe out the electric grid. Not by the United States, but other countries did this. And the effect of it was, it impacted, of course, the military of the country, but also the civilian population. And that's one of the reasons why these are so controversial. They're not just for military targets. They affect everybody. And if you wipe out the grid, well, there were estimates of what would happen to the United States if the grid went down. A lot of people would die. You'd have people starving to death. And these things are not very easily replaced either. So an attack like this, even though you might not think it's directed at killing civilians, would kill a lot of civilians by extension if used on a large scale. Now, the CCP is posting a video of this. It demonstrates a new weapon. Really, it should raise more questions on why they're posting this. Why are they promoting this? Why are they making a big deal about it? I would say it's likely the CCP trying to issue a threat. Because the broader context of this right now, they're saying they're not going to let Russia lose the Ukraine war. They're, again, sending additional troops there. North Korea, now Laos is sending troops. They're backing up that war, keeping it going. And the context of that is the CCP wants its own war. They're saying that if the U.S. loses that, or if Russia loses that, the U.S. will pivot its military to focus against the Chinese Communist Party. And so they're making threats right now. Now, this also raises some additional questions over whether strange trends we've been watching, like there was something very interesting, a deeply suspicious shipment, and many of them, in fact, of signal jammers getting discovered coming here from China. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security even issued an alert on it. This is what they said. They said, the Department of Homeland Security issued a warning on the rise in Chinese-manufactured signal jammers to the United States, which pose a threat to public safety and civilian aviation. Now, it should be clear, these are not like the little, radar detectors you put in your car that a lot of people started putting in their cars to get around some of the the speeding limits and so on like that. These are particularly like backpacks you wear, and they're used oftentimes by criminals or other groups or even terrorists. It says Customs and Border Protection, CBP, has seen a roughly 830% increase in seizures, not even just known shipments, but seizures, despite Chinese companies' attempts to subvert inspection. It says signal jammers can be used to disrupt a range of radio frequency channels and pose a threat to emergency response, law enforcement, and critical infrastructure. And interestingly, it notes this: South American illegal aliens jam calls to local police during home invasions or bank robberies, and it says they've done this in Florida, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Vermont, and Virginia. So you're sitting at home, an illegal alien gang raids your house, they have a signal jammer backpack, you try to call the police, your call doesn't go through. The signal jammer does that. Or they rob a bank, for example, and one of the criminals is wearing this backpack and the calls don't go out, the police don't show up. Imagine all the things you could use it for. Illegal alien gangs are already doing this in the United States using these Chinese-made backpacks. It notes that in February 2025, law enforcement in Texas recovered a signal jammer while arresting an illegal alien from Chile. In December 2024, a criminal used a jammer as law enforcement responded to a burglary. And they say, quote, signal jammers have been used by illegal aliens across the country to jam communications during police operations, bank robberies, burglaries, and other dangerous crimes. Under the vigilance, it says, of CBP, national security begins at America's ports as Chinese manufacturers attempt to smuggle signal jammers. We will continue to seize these tools of terrorism. President Trump and Secretary Noem will always protect America's critical infrastructure and law enforcement. That's according to DHS spokesperson, U.S. federal law. It says also already prohibits the private import, operation, marketing, or sale of any signal jamming equipment that interferes with law enforcement communications, GPS, or radar, and notes that Chinese counterparts could be amenable to cooperation because signal jammers are banned in Beijing for public use. So how are they being manufactured in China and sent here if the CCP watches everything, especially the factories, and they're illegal in China? How does that work? Well, this is particularly interesting because things like this don't just slip under the radar of the Chinese Communist Party. If they're being manufactured in China, they have factories making it, it's known you can order them. That means they're known where they come from. The CCP is not doing anything about it. It would be rare for the Chinese Communist Party to not do something unless they wanted it to happen. Now, as DHS notes, gangs, illegal alien gangs, criminals, they're already using them to rob Americans. They're already using them to rob banks and so on. But these can also be used as tools for terrorism, in particular because they can interfere with communications of first responders. Imagine, for example, the Mumbai terror attack where you had, gunners running around in a group shooting people at random. Imagine if they also had signal jammers that would make it very difficult to respond or find out where they're at. These types of things do pose a very large national security threat. There's also issues, of course, of people using these by airports, and they're messing up like air traffic control. There have been a lot of cases of that as well. On the point of the Chinese Communist Party as well, the risk of a very large war is actually getting pretty serious. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, don't forget to support us by hitting the like button and let us know what you think in the comments below. Now look, the risk of a very large war, some say World War III, it's getting more serious. The Chinese Communist Party is stating publicly it will not allow Russia to lose the war in Ukraine, as I briefly mentioned. And this has to do with the regime's own ambitions. That's the important part. This is not about protecting Russia. This is about the CCP basically destroying Russia to protect itself. CNN said this: Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the European Union's top diplomat that Beijing can't accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine, as this could allow the United States to turn its full attention to China. An official briefed on talks said. In other words, we can't let Russia stop its war, or the United States might focus its military on us, meaning the CCP is propping them up basically as a human shield. Now, notes this, it says this contradicts Beijing's public position of neutrality in the conflict, although I think it's been known. NATO has already determined the CCP is basically propping up Russia in the war. And notes the admission came during what the officials said was a 4-hour meeting with EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas on Wednesday in Brussels that, quote, featured tough but respectful exchanges covering a broad range of issues from cybersecurity, rare earths to trade imbalances, Taiwan, and the Middle East. Now, notes the official said that Wang's private remarks suggested that Beijing might prefer a protracted war in Ukraine that keeps the United States from focusing on its rivalry with China. It says they echo concerns of critics of China's policy that Beijing is geopolitically much more at stake in the Ukrainian conflict than its admitted position of neutrality. What does this really mean? It's what I've been telling you for years. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party wants to divide the focus of the U.S. military. And the context of that is war. One of Xi Jinping's main advisors, Qin Canrong, wrote publicly several years back, again, I've reported on it, the Chinese Communist Party wants to drag the United States into 4 wars. One of those is a war with Russia. They want to keep the U.S. military divided. They want to keep us focused on several global conflicts. They wanted a war with Russia. They wanted a terrorism war. They wanted a war in Latin America. In fact, they wanted us to go to war with Brazil. That was what Qin Canrong actually wrote. Now, in terms of that, what else have we seen? The Chinese Communist Party has been propping up Iran to a large extent. Iran is backing terrorism. The Chinese Communist Party is getting very deeply involved with the cartels, very deeply involved in Venezuela, very deeply involved now in other countries. The CCP, by propping up these gangs, propping up other problems, feeding, again, these jammer backpacks to gangs, robbing Americans, feeding the drug trade, feeding synthetic drugs, killing 70 to 100,000 Americans every single year by different estimates. For the CCP, this is war. And with this, the risk of the world basically falling into another world war, it's becoming a lot more real. In fact, the Daily Mail said this. It said NATO chief Mark Rutte has chillingly warned that World War III will start with simultaneous invasions from Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Secretary General Rutte suggested the combined attacks from the Chinese and Russian leaders could trigger a World War nightmare and bring the planet to the brink of Armageddon. Tell us what you really think, right? They're not mincing words here. I'll give my take in a sec. But it says, according to the NATO chief, China would start by seeking to grab Taiwan while ensuring the Kremlin dictator, Putin, simultaneously attacks NATO territory amid fears that Putin is anyway eyeing the Baltic republics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, formerly part of the USSR. What's really going on? The Russian strategy is about controlling what they call the Eurasian Empire. They want to control the Eurasian region. And part of that ties into what they call the multipolar world order. They believe they don't need to defeat the United States. What they believe they have to do is basically eliminate U.S. partnerships, eliminate U.S. authority, eliminate the ability of the United States to maybe even become an interventionist force in the world. And by doing so, you basically just make the United States another player at the global table. Russia mainly wants to reunite, quote unquote, the former USSR, which means conquering a lot of the former Soviet bloc. Some of those countries would be a lot easier for them because they don't necessarily have large standing armies, with the exception of if NATO intervenes and backs up the standing armies to fight against them, something they do not want. Even a relatively small fighting force, think of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan fighting the Soviet Union. Even a relatively small fighting force will keep them busy for a very long time if they're backed up. The Chinese Communist Party, in its part, it wants to control most of Asia, and frankly, most of the rest of the world as well, but especially the Asian region. They believe that taking Taiwan is the first step of controlling what they call the second island chain. If they can break through the second island chain, it means they can project power through their navy globally. And they're already building up powers throughout Africa, Latin America, most of the Asian region, even going into parts now of Western Europe. And so for the Chinese Communist Party, Taiwan is the first step. If they take Taiwan, the rest of the strategies on the table. The problem they have is they don't want the United States to intervene. And on that point, the United States is aware of this, it seems. The United States right now is focusing its military more heavily towards the Asia Pacific. So despite the CCP trying to stop us from doing this, the United States is doing it. And they're stating publicly this is meant to deter the Chinese Communist Party. Common Defense just said this: the U.S. Army is moving aggressively to transform its command structure in the Pacific as it prepares to deter growing threats from China. Central to this transformation is the establishment of two multi-domain commands, MDCSs, and that's at Multi-Domain Command Pacific and Multi-Domain Command Japan. So one, of course, working directly with Japan on this, very key partnership now with the United States, especially the Quad Alliance, that also includes notably India, also Japan, and of course Australia. That multi-domain command also extending to an extent, when you talk about the Pacific, with the Philippines and even to some degree with Vietnam now. Meaning the United States, in the CCP's eyes, is encircling them, something they do not want to happen. It says here that will oversee the Army's multi-domain task force units in the region. It says that General Ronald Clark, commander of U.S. Army Pacific, outlined the changes in an interview with Defense News, describing the Army's strategic shift as it redefines its capabilities in the Indo-Pacific theater, saying, quote, the authorities associated with that in some cases are to the Indo-Pacific commander and above, Clark explained. What does that really mean? The CCP is trying to stop this from happening. One of the reasons the Chinese Communist Party is fueling wars elsewhere, and let's go over some of it. Right before the Taliban went and took over Bagram airfield and basically just undid all the nation building the United States was doing in Afghanistan for more than a decade, right? When the Taliban rolled in, took everything over, toppled the government that we've tried very hard to install. What happened right before that? The Chinese Communist Party met with the leaders of the Taliban right before that happened. What happened right before the October 7th attack on Israel? Well, the Palestinian Authority, its leaders went and met with Xi Jinping right before that happened. What's happening right now with the Iranian attacks and, Israel facing all this right now, and again, back and forth, they're both attacking each other. Iran is being basically backed up by the Chinese Communist Party. Iran is fueling it. Iran is backing them. Iran was even providing some of the targeting information. We know this now. What's happening with Russia? China and Russia, the CCP, they have a no limits agreement. And it's been determined that China, the CCP, is the main enabler of the war. Without the CCP's involvement, the war would have ended. The CCP's public statements on all of this, it's doing this because it does not want the United States to focus its military on China. Why would that matter? It's because they want to invade Taiwan. The United States is not going to attack the CCP just for the heck of it. The only reason there would be a war, the only reason the U.S. would respond militarily is if the CCP does something militarily to another country. And the one they're targeting right now is Taiwan. The United States, it's not clear if they would defend Taiwan. They don't want to cross that line in stating it publicly. But the United States would back up Taiwan. And Japan, notably, would probably defend Taiwan. And because of the Quad Alliance, if Japan got pulled into it, so would the United States. That's where things stand with it. And so despite all of this, the U.S. is pivoting its military focus to a large extent to the Asia-Pacific region. That's also the context, by the way, of Trump pulling a lot of the U.S. military focus from Western Europe, something that he's been telling other NATO allies, saying that you need to play you need to pay your fair share. You need to take care of your own regional defense. America's not here to pay your defense budgets. The context of that is the United States is trying to pull out a lot of its military focus from that region. Trump seems to want Western Europe to defend against Russia, and that's their job, not the job of the United States for the most part. The thinking with that is he wants to pivot the U.S. military to the Asia-Pacific, specifically to make sure the CCP does not divide the U.S. military. That's the context of what's happening. Now also, as I've reported before, the Chinese Communist Party, they want to keep the United States wrapped up in 4 wars. Again, that's Russia, that's Latin America, that's a terror war. As of now, the United States is not involved in any of this as directly as the CCP wanted us to be involved with. We have not yet crossed that line. It's a very delicate line, but the United States has not yet crossed it. What these are instead, as of now, are proxy wars. We are technically fighting multiple proxy wars, but the force is fighting it, at least on the U.S. ally side. They're holding out. Look at Ukraine, look at Israel, for example. We don't see, for example, Venezuela raiding nearby countries for oil as they were talking about doing. We're not seeing any of that happen just yet. But that being said, the threats are still very real. Trump recently hit the regime also with renewed sanctions in Iran. Iran is also issuing new threats of its own, though. In fact, Reuters said this: Iran-linked hackers have threatened to disclose more emails stolen from U.S. President Donald Trump's circle after distributing a prior batch to the media ahead of the 2024 U.S. election. They're saying in online chats with Reuters on Sunday and Monday, the hackers, who go by the pseudonym Robert, said they had roughly 100 gigabytes of emails. It's a lot of emails from the accounts of White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Trump lawyer Lindsey Halligan, Trump advisor Roger Stone, and porn star turned Trump antagonist Stormy Daniels. And that's that Robert raised the possibility of selling the material, but otherwise did not provide details of their plans. The hackers did not describe the content of the emails either, it says. This is important because public opinion is what sways politics in the United States and in any kind of country where you have an election. And remember what the Iranian regime did during the 2024 elections. They hacked the emails of the Trump team And then they publicly leaked their assessments of J.D. Vance to the, when he was going to be appointed to Trump's running mate. They leaked the assessment of the Trump team to the media. Several establishment news outlets did cover that. They wrote about it. And what that does is it creates an embarrassment. And what it does also, it tries to sway public opinion right ahead of an election. You can actually alter the politics of a country by doing things like this. And so Iran now coming out and saying they're going to release 100 gigabytes of emails and other documents within the Trump circle. I don't know, maybe some of that would help Trump, maybe some of it would harm him, I don't know. But Iran is threatening to do that right now. Now, in other news, though, border security just got a big boost from the big, beautiful bill. And now the Trump administration, they're expected to vastly increase their operations to deport illegal immigrants. Border czar Tom Homan recently issued statements on how that could look. And he noted that while some people are saying 3,000 deportations a day is too much, even that could fall very, very short of what they want in their goals. Watch this.
And for those that say 3,000 a day is too much, I want to remind them, do the math. We'd have to arrest 7,000 every single day for the remainder of this administration just to catch the ones Biden released the nation, right? We talk about 12 million illegal aliens. We've been talking about 12 million for 2 decades. We know at least 8 million were released in this country with Joe Biden.
So in other words, even 7,000 deportations a day is not enough by their statements. 7,000 a day for the rest of the Trump administration would barely get rid of, even they say, just the illegal immigrants who entered under Biden's watch, let alone the pre-existing problem they've identified. Also on this point, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt gave a preview of what we should expect now that ICE has gotten just massive funding from the big, beautiful bill. This is her response to NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Watch this.
Border czar Tom Homan told us this morning that ICE will have to arrest 7,000 illegal immigrants every day for the remainder of this administration to just catch the ones that were let in during the last administration. I'm wondering what the new resources and manpower, of course, given by the big, beautiful bill, which of course opens the door for ICE to hire additional 10,000 agents and officers. What's the administration's expectations now for daily arrest numbers going forward in the upcoming months?
Sure. I'll let the Secretary of Homeland Security and her department speak on what they're looking for in terms of daily numbers. What I can tell you is I receive the daily reports each morning, and ICE is out there doing the jobs that they swore an oath to do, and they are removing public safety threats from our communities every day, and our country is becoming a safer place because of their efforts. And the One Big Beautiful Bill that is now law will give significant resources to ICE and Border Patrol to continue the tremendous work that they are already doing. And I think every American who wants to live in a safe neighborhood should be grateful for their efforts.
Now, also on that point, ICE officers are facing attacks, and this is getting worse. In fact, a gunman was just recently killed after firing at border agents. KRGV, one of the local media, said this. It said 3 people were injured following an early Monday morning shooting at the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol annex in McAllen that left the gunman dead. So individual opened fire at border agents. They killed him. Now it says the McAllen Police Chief Victor Rodriguez identified the suspect as 27-year-old Ryan Luis Mosqueda of Michigan. It says Mosqueda was armed with an assault-style rifle and tactical gear when he opened fire in the parking lot of the building located near the McAllen International Airport at 231S Main Street. And it said during a Monday news conference, McAllen Police Chief Victor Rodriguez said Mosqueda fired toward the federal building and at Border Patrol agents inside of it. Border Patrol agents returned fire, killing Mosqueda, according to Rodriguez. Now, it says a statement from the Department of Homeland Security said the suspect, quote, opened fire at the entrance of the building, and Border Patrol agents and local police helped neutralize the shooter. 2 officers and a Border Patrol employee were injured. A McAllen police officer was injured in the shooting. He's expected to be fine. According to Rodriguez, Border Patrol spokesperson Christina Smallwood said a Border Patrol agent and a U.S. Customs Border Protection employee received non-life-threatening injuries in the shooting. And what this is pointing to is what some are arguing is a bigger problem. You have a lot of political attacks right now. You have a lot of media stirring up the flames. You have a lot of groups going out and targeting border agents, federal agents, and they feel justified in doing it because of the political rhetoric. Tom Homan, the border czar, he blamed this attack on the political campaign that is out there demonizing ICE agents and calling for protests against agents and deportations, even public officials calling on gangs to quote-unquote protect their territory against ICE agents. This is what Tom Homan said about this, speaking with Fox News. Watch.
Who were these suspects who were fired, who actually fired the shots and were later arrested? Who were they, Tom?
Look, they're your typical protesters that go from protesters to criminals. The attack on ICE officers, you've covered it many times, is up nearly 700% now. We were talking 500% a couple weeks ago, so it continues. The rhetoric against the men and women of ICE is skyrocketing, especially by members of Congress. We have senators, we have Congress people that compare ICE to the Nazis, compare ICE to racists, and it just continues. So the public thinks, well, if a member of Congress can attack ICE, why can't we? So the rhetoric has to stop. Or it's a matter of time for someone, one of the ICE officers goes down or a criminal goes down. But we already see an officer go down.
To be clear, so these were American citizens? These weren't illegals who opened fire?
No. As far as the investigation, I want to get ahead of the local investigation on this, but they appear to be agitators, people that are protesting ICE operations, damaging ICE property, want to attack ICE officers.
Now, also on another topic, we're now being told that the late child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein did, in fact, kill himself. They released the video footage. People have noted that there's about a minute of that footage still missing, so we don't really... We can't confirm it, but they're saying he did kill himself. And we're being told also there's no client list. So the hopes that the list could be released are currently off the table. It is possible still. Investigations on the case are underway. And the topic was actually raised during the White House press briefing as well. Watch this.
Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that. But again, when it comes to the FBI and the Department of Justice, they are more than committed to ensuring that bad people are put behind bars. They have an operation going on right now called Summer Heat, which has our murder rate trending.
Now, my personal take, I'd say the optics of this are not good. It's actually making a lot of conservative commentators. Normally you see it on the left. A lot of the conservatives are very unhappy about this. In my take, though, it seems like the administration is saying there is no compiled list that Epstein kept on the actual clients. This would be different from the ones we do know about. We know that he had a book of contacts. We know there are flight logs, those types of things. We also know the Department of Justice is actually reviewing thousands, they say, of videos that include child abuse tied to Epstein. It's possible they're differentiating that to actual, the existence of an actual list of real clients. In other words, if a business has a contact list, the contact list is not necessarily a client list. They're suggesting that they're not just going to release these names unless they can actually incriminate people. Whether we see criminal charges or whether we'll find out more about those alleged videos, you would assume if they have thousands of videos of children being abused, there are presumably people abusing the kids. We're not being given any details on this, nothing essentially, so we'll have to wait and see. That said, questions, comments, let me know what you think in the chat. Let's jump into discussion. Real quick also, because I know a lot of people are wondering about this. People are saying that Donald Trump is on the list. I actually investigated that. I did look into that. In fact, so there was one accuser of Trump tied to Epstein. I can't remember her name on the top of my head, but there was an accuser of Trump. The family had hired a private investigator. He's a good guy. I know him. I spoke with him. There's no evidence, because I looked for it. The private investigator does not like Trump. He looked for it. There is no evidence that Trump was actually abusing anybody. In fact, in that case, they dropped their attempts to go after Trump with it because it just wasn't a strong enough case. And so people making that note, there's no evidence. I looked into it, frankly. I don't care politically enough where I would want to like hide it or something like that. Again, people who don't like Trump were involved in the case trying to make a case out of it. The private investigator does not like Trump at all. Doesn't like him at all. And there's no evidence. So that's where things stand with that. I should note on his point though, he does believe Trump is guilty, but he just was not able to make a strong enough case for it. Again, because it's not there. In terms of Trump flying on Lolita Express, he did not fly on Lolita Express. It was a different jet. And that was basically between Florida and New York. And shortly after that, Trump actually banned Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. So they had a falling out somewhere within all of that. Anyways, anybody wondering about Trump's associations with him in terms of what's known, that's about it. Again, I've personally investigated this, and that's about it. Another question here. Veteran Stories is saying, hence the greater need for the golden defense system. Bad CCP, bad. Yeah. So we were talking about, of course, the Blackout bomb, right? So if the United States were ever attacked with missiles, it would not go over the Pacific. It would probably come over Canada. More than likely, it would go over the Arctic. One of the reasons why there's a big focus now on Arctic defense. Actually, one of the reasons why Trump is saying that even Greenland is really important for U.S. defense. It's because if you look at the Arctic maps and look at the space of Greenland, if they were to instead fall into the CCP or go to Russia and their whole bloc, and they wanted to build like missile systems there, that would be on par with the Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of the threat it would represent to the United States. And so Arctic security is a huge part of missile defense. On the part of the Golden Dome, we're all watching the Iron Dome in Israel. Honestly, if they did not have it, they probably would have been decimated. There were so many rockets, so many missiles launched from Iran. Very few of them actually made it through. And we got to watch and see what a good missile defense system looks like. America paid for a lot of that, by the way. We built a lot of that. And so I think Trump right now is saying, you know what? Why don't we build it for ourselves too? Part of Trump's idea too is make Canada partially pay for it. It's no secret the United States actually covers most of the Canadian defense budget, especially with regional security as it relates to Russia. A lot of air defense. The problem we're going to have with that, Canadian security is American security. And that's just the way it works. Canadian airspace, the only reason Russia or China would go through there would be to attack the United States. And so they could argue, look, I'm not going to pay for it. Obviously, you guys need us. And so, that's the way it is. But we'll see, because Trump is hanging very large tariffs over their heads too. And so they actually might have to pay more into defense. We'll see how it goes. But Trump does very much want the Golden Dome, which would be the American version of the Iron Dome. Not to be confused with the Thunder Dome, by the way. Candace Harden is saying, the only thing that makes me hopeful is that things that are made in China are generally crappy. That is true. I've actually said that. I've mentioned this before too. Keep in mind, the Chinese military is made in China. You know what I mean? And actually, this is you don't see a lot of people talking about this. And one of the reasons you don't see people talking about it, when it comes to military intelligence and thinking and how they view things, they say you need to prepare for the threat. If you underestimate your enemy, you're probably going to lose. Case in point, look at Russia. A lot of people thought Russia was going to steamroll Ukraine. A lot of people thought Russia had one of the strongest militaries on earth. Many people, myself included, thought that they had a very powerful, very well-trained, very well-armed military. And what did we see when they launched their war in Ukraine? Well, their cars got stuck on a muddy road. Ironically, and on the point of this point we're raising here, they had Chinese-made tires, and the tires got flats. So Chinese-made tires screwed over the entire Russian invasion. Big part of the other side was the mud. And then, of course, we watched the fighting prowess of Russia. Their military is not very good, not as good as we thought they were. And so, it's been an interesting thing to watch. That being said, again, it's a very rough war for them, and they're stuck in it right now. And China's, of course, propping it up. On the point of the Chinese Communist Party, though, the thing to think about is this. So I've talked to people who, fought in Afghanistan. They were involved in training the Northern Alliance because one of the goals there was to start up the Afghan army, right? The Afghan National Army, and to train the Afghan police. The failed hope we had was that we could establish a functioning government and they'd keep the Taliban from taking power again. That unfortunately did not work. But one thing I talked to with people who actually did the trainings for the ANA and stuff was this. They had to deprogram a lot of these people because they were trained by the Soviets, a lot of them. Because remember, we kind of followed in their footsteps. They followed in the footsteps of Alexander the Great. We followed in the footsteps of them. And so Russia, during the time of the Soviet Union, their equivalent of the Vietnam War was the war in Afghanistan. They were fighting what was known as the Mujahideen. Interestingly, Osama bin Laden was kind of part of the Mujahideen. If you want to watch a very funny movie from that time, go and watch Rambo 3. Rambo 3, where Rambo fights with the Mujahideen against the Soviets, and the end of the movie actually has a dedication to the brave Mujahideen fighting the Soviets, because we were supplying the Mujahideen, who later became the Taliban. Anyways, aside from that very awkward time in history, the issue you have, the Afghan forces, a lot of them on the other side were being trained by the Soviets. And what did they teach them? The Russian, Soviet, Chinese way of doing war, which is, it was a communist system. Basically, do what you're told, don't question it, even if it doesn't make sense. Don't do anything you're not told to do. So you have troops who are trained to not think for themselves. They're trained to not think for themselves. If they're told to, if they defend a foxhole, they're fighting, they're not going to move out of it, they're not going to rush their targets, they're not going to fall back unless they're told to do it. If they're marching and they run into a wall, they're going to sit in front of that wall and wait until they get orders from their commander to move around the wall and keep walking. They don't think for themselves. They're trained like that. If they're told to do something that's absolutely stupid, and they're all going to die if they do it, if they're told to do it, they have to do it. The Soviet commissars would shoot you if you didn't do it, such as rushing German machine guns with a shovel or something like that. Things like that. That's how they trained their military. The current Russian military, they're a bit better, they're not much better. But the Chinese military is basically trained in the exact same way. The Chinese military, that is how they're trained also. They're drones. They're not trained to think for themselves. I would say this is probably the biggest weakness, not even just in those countries, but in a lot of countries' militaries. They don't take initiative. They don't strategize independently. They don't move. They're not dynamic. And many people have pointed out that's one of the things that makes the American military very, very, very unique. Americans are not known to like to be told what to do, right? If you tell them to do something stupid, they might nod and give you a thumbs up and then do something else. Americans are known for this. The way our military is taught, every single troop is trained to be a leader. So that if the guy in front of them gets shot, the next guy in the line picks it up, takes command, and is probably just as effective, if not more effective sometimes. That's the way we train our military. That results in some funny things like guys doing crazy things or things they shouldn't do. But it also makes us very hard to predict. And people who fought alongside the U.S. military know when guys are locked down in their foxholes or whatever else, the Americans are moving. And they're constantly moving and strategizing. It's almost like a football game, American football. You move, you re-strategize, you move, you re-strategize, and they keep doing that. And so when you're dealing with militaries that were trained under the polar opposite thinking, the communist ones, China, Russia, those guys, they don't think like that. Their thinking is different. And so with the CCP, that's probably the biggest weakness of their military. They're trained to be drones. And also, again, just the military prowess. We don't talk about it a lot, but, of course, I talk to a lot of other China experts and, we have conversations. We'll sometimes send videos to each other of when the Chinese Communist Party does military drills, it's known that a lot of their equipment tends to break down. So their tanks just don't work, or their troop carriers sink into a river, or their vehicles get flat tires. They have huge logistic problems in China. They really can't move their military around. They don't have the system to transport them. The most they can do is put them on trains. And so because of that, they have to have regional commands, and the regional commands have all these problems. Their ability to defend themselves in the interior of China would be very bad for them. And so they have a lot of issues like this. What they do have is a lot of people, and they have a lot of production capacity. So their ability to build warships is massive, for example. And so you'd be dealing with mass operations. But again, the effectiveness would be another issue. But for military, you always have to look at the potential risk. You don't want to underestimate people. And so on the public surface, in terms of when you read assessments, they'll always imagine that they are the most threatening they can be. And that's what you normally see on the surface. All right, long answer to that, sorry. The W, you're saying, Josh, if China is issuing this type of threat, is this their attempt to show strength when they're actually vulnerable right now? Possibly. The fact that they showed an animated video and not an actual missile demonstration even raises questions of how far they are with producing these things. What they really showed was a concept video. At the same time, the Blackout bomb we mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily new technology. Even Baltic countries, even they would have that type of weapon. So it's not a new type of weapon. But the concerning thing is if you're saying you would use something like that. There are certain weapons that most countries can build, but you don't use them. Biological weapons, big example of that. Virus bombs, that type of stuff. You don't want to showcase biological weapons. Because when you do, you're talking about civilization-ending weapons, things that can wipe out entire countries. And everybody has them. Nobody wants to use them because of the decimation they would cause. Same thing with nuclear weapons. A lot of countries are nuclear powers. Not the majority, but enough to be of concern. The Chinese Communist Party is a nuclear power, for example. They're not showcasing nuclear weapons because you don't do that. them showcasing weapons that would destroy the electric grid. For the public, we don't think of that as being as serious as a virus bomb or again, like a biological weapon, right? We don't think of it as being as serious as a nuclear weapon. But in terms of the casualties that you would cause to a civilian population if you were to wipe out the electric grid, it's about the same. Different estimates have said that if the electric grid in the United States were to go completely down, the majority of our country would be dead within maybe 3 months because of issues with refrigeration, the time it would take to transport replacement parts. It would take years. You wouldn't get it in time. The issue of even water purification, you would very quickly have people run out of food and run out of water, except maybe the Mormons. They've been preparing for this for a while. So other than them and your friendly neighborhood prepper, a lot of people would starve to death. And so these weapons, they're actually really serious. It's not taken serious enough because we don't see it as something that kills civilians directly. But indirect, it would be almost as bad as a nuclear war. James Dyson, you're saying this is exactly why you don't let weather balloons from China fly over the U.S. Yeah, right? They say this is exactly why you don't let China buy U.S. land. And I could go on and on. James, I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. Yeah, and so that is a concern. So I can tell you when it comes to the CCP buying land and so on, one of the concerns I've heard raised within like the cybersecurity community, you can install certain elements. Okay, when we talk about 5G, right, let's just talk about it directly. People talk about 5G. There's 3G, there's 4G, there's 5G. Basically, what is that? It's fifth generation technology for like Wi-Fi and that type of stuff, and for cell phones. When we think about this, we only think of it as something that enables a faster internet connection. What is the difference between 5G and 4G? 5G has more penetrative ability. It can go through walls more easily. Barriers do much less to stop it. When you look at, if you want to get more technical, when you get into radio frequencies, frequencies within the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the spectrum of light, which you can weaponize, by the way, I'll get into in a minute. There are certain bandwidths or certain frequencies that you're not allowed to access. Military frequencies, government frequencies. Some of these are on the extreme low frequencies. Normal 4G cannot even access some of these frequencies, but 5G can. And so what does that mean? When you get into the areas of electronic warfare, and this is something a lot of the public a lot of people don't really get it, right? Because we only think about it as a consumer technology. Oh, faster internet, faster phone service. We don't think about weaponization. When you get into technologies that can access using, electromagnetic systems, when you can access those frequencies, you can also use them for other things. The ability to scan those frequencies can be used for espionage. One example of this, and one of the big concerns, when the CCP is buying up land and building sometimes electronic facilities by military bases. This is also a concern raised, I should note, with the CCP buying up trains or building trains. Trains have tons of sensors on them, and those can actually be used to spy. They can be used, you can use them to hack, you can use them to steal information, you can use them to spy on communications and everything under the sun. One of the things notably as well, let's talk about American capacities, fifth generation fighter jets. One of the capabilities of the F-22 fighter jet is, one of the reasons they say it's so valuable is the electronic systems, electronic warfare, but also spying capabilities, the ability to access all these different frequencies and information. You can steal stuff, you can hack stuff, you can monitor stuff, you can basically see everything. And so it represents a national security threat in that regard. If you get to the more scary part of it, that's when you get to the abilities of emitted electromagnetic frequencies, EMF, right? A lot of people like to think that EMF is just a big conspiracy theory. What does it actually mean? Emitted electromagnetic frequency. Now, the problem you have when people talk about weaponization of EMF is we think of like cell phones, and you think, oh, the crazy people want to put tinfoil on their heads to protect themselves against Wi-Fi signals. Fine, right? But there are military technologies that use electromagnetic weapons. One basic example of this is microwave weapons. You can buy, well, you can't buy these, but militaries can buy these. There are governments in the world, in parts of the world, that use these for crowd control, to disperse people involved in riots. In fact, don't take my word for it, look it up online. The United States has actually demonstrated microwave weapons. They look like tractor trailers you'd put on the back of your truck, and they just have a thing that pops up, and they can use them for crowd dispersal. They use them for crowd control. Those are the basic low end of this, right? Microwave weapons. The Chinese Communist Party has talked about using microwave weapons as well, because, you know, just like with anything, you can turn up the heat. If you use the very low end of it, you're going to be in it and you're going to feel extremely uncomfortable. You're going to want to get out of that area as quickly as you possibly can because it makes you feel ill, which is why they use these for crowd control. The high end of it will melt your eyeballs, right? And the CCP has actually talked about this. In fact, I talked about the Assassin's Mace earlier. Some of the few documents we have about the Assassin's Mace are them talking about experiments on animals using microwave weapons. In particular, they talk about the effects of microwave weapons on the eyeballs and the skin of animals. And so, again, when you're talking about the weaponization of things like even 5G, you can't think of them as being limited to their stated purpose. All they need to do is create expanded capacity to turn something like that into a weapon. You can weaponize things by enabling it to have emitted technologies using basically the same infrastructure. And that's where the communication on these things often gets lost. That's often where you lose people between, you know, people who get blamed as being conspiracy theorists versus people who know about real world weapons and the way that things like this exist right now as we speak. You know what I mean? That's where the communication gets lost. Robert Schlosser, you're saying, the Chinese people are victims of the CCP as more than anyone. There was an old saying about cutting the head off of the snake. Why aren't we doing that? China is just as much of a threat as Iran, just as slower, way so far, but that is about to change. Well, and the crazy thing with the Chinese Communist Party is they say it. They admit it. They say that they cannot exist in the same world as the United States. The exact slogan they have is, "We live, you die." All of their talks about business are about business warfare with the United States. All their talks about the economy are economic warfare with the United States. How many times a week do they, hack our companies and steal intellectual property and then build those things and compete with us in the markets, and we just let them do it? Go on Amazon right now and tell me how many knockoff Chinese goods you see of American products. How many counterfeits do you see being sold? It's insane. And we let them do it. We just let them do it. And that's on the low end of the threat. Look at drug warfare. Look at what they're doing with the drugs. Why don't we take that seriously? Look at the spies, the amount of them they catch trying to breach our systems. Why don't we take that seriously? Look at the pressure they put on American businesses. Look, Trump's calling out Canada for wanting to tax American tech companies. What about the CCP forcing American tech companies to hand over their core like codes and stuff like that, to hand over like the core parts of their codes and their products when they go there? What about them forcing American tech companies to build like CCP cells within their companies? Why do we let them do that? The things we've let them do, it's insane. We let them censor Hollywood films, and we just let them do it. We let them pressure a basketball team because one of the guys is Muslim and writes a message against enslaved Muslims in China on his shoe, while everybody else is kneeling because they're mad at America for historical slavery. And one guy calls out real-world, current-day slavery, and he gets punished? Why do we let them do that? It's insane. We call out human rights abuses. The CCP persecutes Christians. The CCP persecutes Muslims. Where are the Christians and Muslims making noise about that? They persecute Falun Gong practitioners, and for the most part, it's been condemned by quite a few governments. I know the House of Representatives did pass the Falun Gong Protection Act, but where's the outcry against live organ harvesting? We can talk about the concentration camps of the Nazis. What about the concentration camps right now of the Chinese Communist Party? What about the extermination camps they're building to harvest people's organs for profit that we know they're doing right now in Xinjiang? We know they're building them. Why don't we take that into consideration and say, is this a country we should be doing business with? And I mean, in the entire picture, they back up, they're the enabling force of the war with Russia. They're the enabling force of a lot of global terrorism. They're the enabling force of the drug cartels. They're the enabling force of basically every conflict the United States is facing. And we don't call them out on it. We don't take it seriously. We don't draw any red lines. And we just let them do it. Why is that? It's crazy. It's crazy that we don't take this more seriously. Robert Schlosser, you're saying, the Chinese people are victims of the CCP as more than anyone. I should add too, briefly, I know there are a lot of evangelicals who've tried very hard getting Bibles into China, and they get arrested and they get persecuted. I know Christian pastors who've done this, and they've been persecuted. Why does the free world not say something about that? You know what I mean? It's crazy. Anyways, back to this. Sorry, I could go on for a long time. Robert Schlosser, you're saying the Chinese people are victims of the CCP. I already went over that. Anyways, folks, we're going on too long. I could go on all day with this. Let me know what you think in the chat. What do you think? I mean, I don't know. I know if you talk to guys like Gordon Chang, they say the only way you can deal with the Chinese Communist Party is to not deal with them at all. We need to decouple completely and treat them like they treat us, which is a hostile foreign nation. Any door you leave open, they'll take advantage of it. And they do, and we know they do. It's not even hidden, right? What do you think the solution should be? Like, what should we do about it? I'm curious what your thoughts are. On the other point, what do you think about 5G? Let's get into the real fun topics here. Do you like it? A lot of you probably have internet routers that have 5G. I actually do. It is a modern technology, but when you get into the weeds of electronic warfare, I mean, has anybody thought about artificial intelligence, and every guy who's developing it is saying this is going to end the human race? like they just say it. I get the march of technological advancement, do we ever draw the line? I don't know. What do y'all think about this, folks? Anyways, thank you so much for being here. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Please don't forget to give this video a like. It really does help us with the algorithms. I will see you all tomorrow. And that said, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.